Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Paddy the Panda, and this is another one of my little stories to help us relax and to maybe just doze off to sleep nice and calmly. Deep breaths, first of all. I'm going to breathe in for 7, hold for 5, and breathe out for 9. Now, it's okay if you can't do that just yet, but keep trying it. Deep breath in and deep breath out. And feel free to close your eyes if you want. Today we have a lovely little story. It's a story called The Keening Woman, and it's by one of my favorites, Patrick Pearse. Um, it's an old story, a couple of 100 years old, that's been retold. And without further ado, I guess I'm just going to start. The Keening Woman by Patrick Pearse. Colleen, says my father to me one morning after the breakfast, and I putting my books together to be stirring to school. Colleen, says he, I have a task for you today. Sean will tell the master it was myself kept you at home today, or it's the way he'll be thinking you're mitching, like you were last week. Let you not forget now, Sean. Hear me? I will not, father, says Sean, and I lip on him. He wasn't too thankful it to be said that it was not for him. My father had the task. This son was well satisfied, for my lessons were always a trouble to me, and the master promised me a beating the day before, unless I'd been them at the top tip of my mouth the next day. What will you do, Colleen? Says my father when Sean was gone off. Is to bring the ass and a little car with you to Screeb and draw home a load of sedge. Michaeline Murray is cutting it for me. We'll be starting, with God's help, to put the new roof on the house after tomorrow, if the weather stands. Michaeline took the ass and car with him this morning, says I. You'll have to leg it then, a Micho, says my father. As soon as Michaeline has an ass load cut, fetch it home with you on the car, and let Michaeline tear till he's black. We might draw the other share tomorrow. It wasn't long till I was knocking steps out of the road. I gave my back to Kilbracken and my face to Turlock. I left Turlock behind me and I made for Gortmore. I stood a spell looking on the oared boat that was on Loch Ellery, and another spelling playing with some inner boys that were late going to Gortmore school. I left them at the school gate and I reached Glencanna. I stood for the third time watching a big eagle that was sunning himself on Carrickcouple. East with me then till I was in Derrybanov, and the hour and a half wasn't spent when I cleared Glashaduff Bridge. Just to let you know, these are all the names of places. There was a house that time a couple of 100 yards east from the bridge, near the road on your right hand side, and you drawing towards Screeb. It was often before that I saw an old woman standing in the door of that house, but I had no acquaintance on her, nor did she ever put talk or topic on me. A tall, thin woman she was, her head as white as snow, and two dark eyes, as they would be two burning sods flaming in her head. She was a woman that would scare me if I met her in a lonely place in the night. Times she could be knitting or carding, and she crooning low to herself. But the thing she would be mostly doing when I travelled would be standing in the door and looking from up and down the road, exactly as she'd be waiting for someone that would be away from her and she'd be expecting him home. She was standing there that moment as usual, her hand to her eyes, and she staring up the road. When she saw me going past, she nodded her head. I went over to her. Do you see a person at all coming up the road? Says she. I don't, says I. I thought I saw someone. I can't be that, I'm stray. See, isn't that a young man making up on us? She says. Devil a one do I see, says I. There's not a person at all between the spot we're on the turning of the road. I was astray then, says she. My sight isn't as good as it was. I thought I saw him coming. I don't know what's keeping him. Who's away from you? Says myself. My son, that's away from me, she says. Is he long away? This morning he went to Uachtarod. But sure, he couldn't be here for a while, says I. You'd think he'd be barely in Uachtarod by now. And he doing his best unless it was the morning train he went from the burnt house. What's this I'm saying, says she. It's not today he went, but yesterday. Or the day or yesterday, maybe. I'm losing my wits. If it's on the train, he's coming, says I. He'll not be here for another couple of hours yet. On the train, says she. What train? The train that does be at the burnt house at noon. He didn't say a word about a train, says she. There was no train coming as far as the burnt house yesterday. Isn't there a train coming to the burnt house these years, says I, wondering greatly. She didn't give me an answer, however. She was staring up the road again. There came a sort of dread on me of her, and I was about gathering off. If you see him on the road, says she, tell him to make hurry. I have no acquaintance on him, says I. You'd know him easy. He's the playboy of the people, a young active lad, and he's well set up. He has a white head on him, like it's on yourself, and grey eyes, like his father had. Bawneens he's wearing. If I see him, I say, I'll tell him you're waiting for him. Do, son, says she. With that, I stirred on my east and left her standing in the door. She was there still, and I coming home a couple of hours after that, and the load of sedge on the car. He didn't come yet, says I to her. No, Maureen, you didn't see him. No. No. What could have happened to him? There were signs of rain on the day. Come in till the shower is over, says she. It's seldom I do have company. And I left the ass in the little car on the road, and I went into the house. Sit and drink a cup of milk, says she. I sat on the bench in the corner, and she gave me a drink of milk and a morsel of bread. I was looking all around the house, and I eating and drinking. There was a chair beside the fire, and a white shirt and a suit of clothes laid on it. I have these ready against when he come, says she. I washed the bonnets yesterday after he departed. No, the day or yesterday. I don't know right about which day I washed them, but anyhow, they'll be clean and dry before him when he does come home. What's your own name? Says she suddenly after a spell of silence. I told her. Misha, my love, you are, says she. The very name that is, on my own son. Whose are you? I told her. And do you say you're a son of Sean Fekeen, says she. Your father was in the public house in Uachtarard that night. She stopped suddenly with that, and there came some change on her. She put her hand to her head. You'd think that its madness was struck on her. She sat before the fire then, and she stayed for a while dreaming into the heart of that fire. It was short till she began moving herself to and fro over the fire and crooning or keening in a low voice. I didn't understand the words right, or it would be better for me to say that it's not on the words I was thinking, but on the music. It seemed to me that there was a loneliness of the hills in the dead time of night, or the loneliness of the grave where nothing stirs in it but worms in that music. Here are the words as I heard them from my father after that. Sorrow and death, it is it that blackened my heart, that carried off my love and left me ruined, without friend, without companion, under the roof of my house. But the sorrow in my middle, and I lamenting. Going the mountain one evening, the bird spoke to me sorrowfully. The melodious snipe and the voiceful curlew, telling me that my treasure was dead. I called on you, and your voice I did not hear. I called again, and an answer I did not get. I kissed your mouth, and oh God, wasn't it cold? Och, it's cold, your bed is it, the lonely graveyard. And oh, sod green grave where my child is. Oh, narrow little grave, since you are his bed. My blessing on you and the thousand blessings on the green sods that are over my pet. Sorrow on death, its blessing is not possible. It lays fresh and withered together. And oh, pleasant little son, it is my affliction, your sweet body to be making clay. When she had that finished, she kept on moving herself to and fro and lamenting in a low voice. It was a lonesome place to be, in the backward house, and you have no company but your solitary old woman, mourning to herself by the fireside. There came a dread and a creeping on me, and I rose to my feet. It's time for me to be going home, says I. The evening's clearing. Come here, she says to me. I went hither to see her, and she laid two hands softly on my head, and she kissed my forehead. The protection of God to you, little son, said she. May he let the harm of the year over you, and may he increase the good fortune and happiness of the year to you and to your family. With that, she freed me from her, and I left the house and pushed on home with me. Where were you, Colleen, when the shower caught you? Says my mother to me that night. Didn't do you any hurt. I waited in the house of yon old woman on the east side of Glashhaduff, their bridge, says I. She was talking to me about her son. He's in Uachtarán these past 2 days, and she doesn't know when he hasn't come home. Hear this? My father looked at my mother. The Keening woman, says he. Who is she, says I. The Keening woman, says my father. Myrna of the Keens. Why was that name given to her, says I. For the Keens she does not be making. For the Keens she does be making, answered my father. She's the most famous Keening woman in Connemara or in the Joyce country. She's always sent for when anyone dies. She keens my father, and there's a chance she'll be keen myself. But may God comfort her. It's her own dead she does be keening always. It's all the same what corpse it is in the house. And what's her son doing in Uachtarán, says I. Her son died 20 years since, Colleen, says me mother. He didn't die at all, says me father, and a very black look on him. He was murdered. Who murdered him? Seldom I saw my father angry, but it was awful his anger was when it would rise up in him. He took a start out of me when he spoke again, he was that angry. Who murdered your own grandfather? Who drew the red blood out of my grandmother's shoulders with a lash? Who would do it but the English? My curse on. My mother rose, and she put her hand on his mouth. Don't give your curse to anyone, Sean, says she. My mother was that kind-hearted. She wouldn't like to throw the bad word at the devil himself. I believe she'd have pity in her heart for Cain and for Judas and for Dermot of the Gauls. It's time for us to be saying our rosary, says she. Your father will tell you about Colleen Myrna some other night. Father, says I, are we going on our knees? We should say a prayer for Colleen's soul this night. We'll do that, son, says my father kindly. Sitting up one night in the winter that was on us, my father told us the story of Myrna from start to finish. It's well I mind him in the firelight, a broad-shouldered man, a little stooped, his share of his going grey, lines on his forehead, a sad look in his eyes. He was mending an old sail that night, and I was on my knees beside him in the name of helping him. My mother and my sisters were spinning frieze. Shawneen was stretched on his face on the floor, and he in grips of a book. 'Twas small the heed he gave to the same book, for it's the pastime of he had to be taking the soles of my feet, taking an odd pinch out of my calves. But as my father stirred out of the story, Sean gave over his trickery, and it is short till he was listening as interested as anyone. It would be hard not to listen to my father when he tell a story like that by the heartside. He was a sweet storyteller. It's often I think there was music in his voice, a low, deep music like in the bass of an organ of Tuam Cathedral. 20 years ago gone, Colleen, says my father. Since the night myself and Colleen Myrna, may God give him grace, and 3 or 4 others of the neighbours were in Nyochton's public house in Uachtarán. There was a fair in the town the same day, and we were drinking a glass before taking the road home on ourselves. There were 4 or 5 men in it from Carrow and from Joyce's country, and 6 or 7 of the people of the town. There came in a stranger, a thin black man that nobody knew. He called for a glass. Did you hear, people, says he to us, and he drinking with us, that the Lord is to come home tonight? What business has the devil here, says someone. Bad work he's up to as usual, says the black man. He had settled to put 7 families out of their holdings. Who's to be put out, says one of us. Old Thomas O'Dreenan from the Glen. I'm told the poor fellow's dying, but he's on the roadside, he'll die. If God hasn't him already, a man of the O'Conairs that lives in a cabin on the side of Loch Shindilia, Manning from Shnavbo, Tuan Ahanaman, a woman on the head of the island, and Anthony O'Greelish from Lower Camas. Anthony's wife is heavy with child, says Coomy and O'Neill. That won't save her, the creature, says the black man. She's not the first woman out of the country that bore her child in a ditch side of the road. There wasn't a word out of any one of us. What sort of men are ye, says the black man. You're not men at all. I was born and raised in a countryside, and my word to you, the men of that place wouldn't let the whole English army together throw out 7 families on the road without them knowing the reason why. Are you afraid of the man who's coming here tonight? It's easy to talk, said Queen, but what way can we stop the Bodach? Murder him this night, said a voice behind me. Everyone started. I myself turned around. It was Colleen Myrna that spoke. His two eyes were blazing in his head, a flame in his cheeks, and his head thrown high. A man that spoke that, whatever his name and surname, said the stranger. He went hither and gripped Colleen's hand. Drink a glass with me, he said. Colleen drank the glass, and the others wouldn't speak. It's time for us to be shortening the road, says Queen Mean after a little spell. We got a good move on us. We took the road home. The night was dark. There was no wish for talk on any of us at all. When we came to the head of the street, Queen Mean stood in the middle of the road. Where's Colleen Murna? Says he. We didn't feel him from us till Queeming spoke. He wasn't in the company. Myself went back to the public house and Queeleen wasn't in it. I questioned the pot boy. He said Queeleen and the black man left the shop together 5 minutes after our going. I searched the town. There wasn't tale or tidings of Colleen anywhere. I left the town and I followed the other men. I hoped it might be that he'd be to find before me. He wasn't, nor the track of him. It was very far in the night when we reached Glashaduff Bridge. There was a light in Myrna's house. Myrna herself was standing at the door. God save you men, said she, coming over to us. Is Colleen with you? He isn't, miss, says I. He stayed behind us in Uachtarad. Did he sell? Says she. He did, and well, says I. There's every chance that he'll stay in the town till the morning. The night's black and cold itself. Wouldn't it be as well for him to go in and lie down? It's not worth my while, said she. I'll wait up till he comes. May God hasten you. We departed. There was, as it would be, a load on my heart. I was afraid that there was something after happening to Colleen. I had ill notions of that black man. I lay down on the bed after coming home, but I didn't sleep. The next morning, myself and your mother were eating breakfast when the latch was lifted from the door, and in comes Queeveen O'Neill, and he could hardly draw his breath. What's the news with you, man? Says I. Bad news, he said. The Lord was murdered last night. He was got to on the road a mile to the east of Uachtarad, and a bullet through his heart. The soldiers were in Myrna's house this morning on the track of Colleen, but he wasn't there. He hasn't come home yet. It said it was he murdered the Lord. You mind the words he said last night? I leaped up and out of the door with me, down the road and east to Myrna's house. There was no one before me but herself. The furniture in his house was this way and that way, and where the soldiers were searching. Myrna got up when she saw me at the door. Sean O'Connor, says she, for God's pitiful sake, tell me where's my son? You were along with him. Why isn't he coming home to me? Let you have patience, Myrna, says I. I'm going to Uachtarad after him. I struck the road, going to the street of Uachtarad. I saw a great ruck of people. The bridge and the street before the chapel were black with people. People were making on the spot from every art. But a thing that put terror in my heart, there wasn't a sound out of that terrible gathering, only the eyes of every man stuck in a little knot that was in the right middle of the crowd. Soldiers that were there in that little knot, black coats and red coats, and them and guns and swords in their hands. And among the black coats and red coats I saw a country boy, and bawneens on him. Colleen Murray that was in it, and he in holes of the soldiers. The poor boy's face was as white as my shirt, but he had the beautiful head of him lifted proudly, and it wasn't the head of a coward, that head. He was brought to the barracks and the crowd followed him. He was taken to Galway that night. He was put on the trial of next month. It, it was sworn that he was in the public house that night. It was sworn that the black man was discoursing on the landlords. It was sworn that he and the Lord would be coming that night to throw people out of their holdings the next day. It was sworn that Colleen Ware was listening attentively to him. It was sworn that Colleen said those words, "Murder him this night." When Queeveen said, "What can we do to stop the Bodach?" It was sworn that the black man praised him for saying these words, that he shook hands with him, and they drank a glass together. It was sworn that Colleen remained in the shop after going to Rosnagiri people, and that after himself and the black man left the shop together 5 minutes after that. There came a peeler then, and he swore he saw Colleen and the black man leaving the town, that it wasn't the Rosnagiri road that they took themselves on, but the Galway road. At 8 o'clock they left the town. At 8:30, a shot was fired at the Lord on the Galway road. Another peeler swore he heard a report of the shot. He swore he ran to the place, and closing up to the place he saw two men running away. A thin man, one of them was, and he dressed like a gentleman would be. A country boy, the other one was. What kind of clothes was the country boy wearing, says the lawyer. A suit of bawneen, said the peeler. Is that the man you saw, said the lawyer, stretching his fingers towards Colleen. I would say it was. Do you swear it? The peeler didn't speak for a spell. Do you swear it, said the lawyer. I do, said the peeler. The peeler's face at that moment was whiter than the face of Colleen himself. A share of us swore then that Colleen never fired a shot out of a gun, and he was a decent, kindly boy that wouldn't hurt a fly. If he had the power first. The parish priest swore that he knew Colleen from the day he baptized him, that it was his opinion that he never committed a sin, and that he wouldn't believe from anyone at all that he would slay a man. He was no use for us. What good was our testimony against the testimony of the police? Judgment of death was given on Colleen. His mother was present all the time. She didn't speak a word from start to finish, but her two eyes struck in the two eyes of her son, and her two hands knitted under her shawl. He won't be hanged, says Myrna that night. God promised me that he won't be hanged. A couple of days after that, we heard that Colleen wouldn't be hanged, that it's how the soul would be spared him on account of him being so young as he was, but that he'd be kept in gaol for the term of his life. He won't be kept, says Myrna. Jesus, she would say, don't let him keep my son from me. It's marvellous the patience the women had, and the trust she had for the Son of God. It's marvellous the faith and the hope and the patience of the woman. She went to the parish priest. She said to him that if he'd write to the people of Dublin, asking them to let Colleen out to her, it's certain he would be let out. They won't refuse you, father, said she. The priest said that there would be no use at all in writing, that no heed would be paid to his letter, but that he himself would go to Dublin, and that he would speak with the great people, and that maybe some good might come out of it. He went. Marna was full sure her son would be home to her by the end of the week or two. She readied the house before him. She put lime on in herself, inside and outside. She set two neighbours to put a new thatch on it. She spun the makings of a new suit and clothes for him. She dyed the wool with her own hands. She brought it to the weaver, and she made the suit with the frieze came home. We thought it long while the priest was away. He wrote a couple of times to the master, but there was nothing new in the letters. He was doing his best, he said, but he wasn't succeeding too well. He was going from person to person, but it's not much satisfaction anybody was giving to him. It was plain from the priest's letters that he hadn't much hope he'd be able to do anything. None of us had much hope either, but But Myrna didn't lose the wonderful trust she had in God. The priest will bring my son home with him, she used to say. There was nothing making her anxious but fear that she wouldn't have the new suit ready before Colleen's coming. But it was finished at last. She had everything ready, repair on the house, the new suit laid on a chair before the fire, and still no word of the priest. Isn't it Colleen will be glad when she sees the comfort I have in this house? She said, isn't it he will look spruce going up the road to Mass on Sunday, and that suit on him? It's well I mind the evening the priest came home. Myrna was waiting for him since morning, the house cleaned up and the table laid. Welcome home, she said when the priest came in. She was watching the door, as she would be expecting someone else to come in, but the priest closed the door behind him. I thought that it's with yourself he'd come, father, says Myrna. But sure, it's the way he wouldn't come like to come on the priest's car. He was shy like that always, the creature. Oh, poor Myrna, said the priest, holding her by her two hands. I can't conceal the truth from you. He's not coming at all. I didn't succeed in doing anything. They wouldn't listen to me. Morna didn't say a word. She went over and she sat down before the fire. The priest followed her and laid his hand on her shoulder. Morna, says he, like that. Let me be, father, for a while, says she. May God and his mother reward you for what you've done for me, but leave me to myself for a while. I thought you'd bring him home to me, and it's a great blow on me that he hasn't come. The priest left her to herself. He thought he'd be no help to her till the pain of the blow would be blunted. The next day, Myrna wasn't to be found. Tale of her tidings no one had of her. Word nor wisdom we never heard of her until till the end of a quarter. A share of us thought that it's maybe out of her mind the creature went, and a lonely death to come to her in the hollow of some mountain, or drowning in a bog hole. The neighbours searched the hills around, but her track wasn't to be seen. One evening, myself was digging potatoes in the garden when I saw a solitary woman making on me up the road. A tall, thin woman, her head well set, a great walk under her. If Werner ni Fianocta is living, says I to myself, it's she that's in it. 'Twas she, all right, and none else. Down with me to the road. Welcome home, Werner, says I to her. Have you any news? I have, then, says she, and good news. I went to Galway. I saw the governor of the Gael. He said to me that he wouldn't be able to do a taste, that it's the Dublin people would be able to let him out of Gael if its letting out was to be got. I went off to Dublin. Oh Lord, isn't it many a hard, stony road I walked? Isn't it many a fine town I saw before I came to Dublin? Isn't it a great country Ireland is? I used to say to myself every evening when I'd be told I'd have so many miles to walk before I'd see Dublin. But, great thanks to God and to the glorious Virgin, I walked in the street of Dublin. At last, one cold, wet evening, I found a lodging. The morning of the next day, I inquired for the castle. I was pushing on the way. I went there. They wouldn't let me in at first, but I was at them till I got leave of talk with some man. He put me on to another man, and a man that was higher than himself. He sent me to another man. I said to them all I wanted was to see the Lord Lieutenant of the Queen. I saw him at last. I told him my story. He said to me that he couldn't do anything. I gave my curse to the castle of Dublin and out the door with me. I had £1 in my pocket. I went aboard a ship, and that morning after I was in Liverpool of the English, I walked the long roads of England from Liverpool to London. When I came to London, I asked knowledge of the Queen's castle. I was told I went there. They wouldn't let me in. I went there every day, hoping that I'd see the Queen coming out. After a week, I saw her come out. There were soldiers and great people about her. I went over to the Queen before she was in her coach. There was a paper. A man in Dublin wrote for me in my hand. An officer seized me. The Queen spoke to him, and he freed me from him. I spoke to the Queen. She didn't understand me. I stretched the paper to her. She gave the paper to the officer, and he read it. He wrote certain words on the paper, and he gave it back to me. The Queen spoke to another woman that was alone, along with her. The woman drew out a crown piece and gave it to me. I gave her back the crown piece, and I said, "That's not silver I wanted, but my son." They laughed. It's my opinion they didn't understand me. I showed them the paper again. The officer laid his finger on the words he was after writing. I curtsied to the Queen, and I went off with me. A man read for me the words the officer wrote. It's what was in it, that they would write to me about Colleen without delay. I struck the road home then, hoping that maybe there would be a letter before me. Do you think, Sean, says Myrna, finishing her story, has the priest any letter? There wasn't a letter at all in the house before me coming out of the road, but I'm thinking it's to the priest did send a letter, for it's a chance the great people might know him. I don't know, did any letter come, says I. I would say there didn't, but for the priest would be telling us. It will be here some day yet, says Myrna. I'll go to the priest anyhow and I'll tell him my story. In the road with her and up the hill to the priest's house, I saw her going home again that night, and the darkness falling. It's wonderful how she was giving it to her foot soles, considering what she suffered of distress and hardship for a quarter. A week went by. There didn't come any letter. Another week passed, no letter came. The third week and still no letter. It would take tears out of the grey stones to be looking at Werner and the anxiety that was on her. It would break your heart to see her going in the road to the priest every morning. We were afraid to speak to her about Colleen. We had evil notions. The priest had evil notions. He said to us one day that he heard from another priest in Galway that it's not more than well Colleen was, that it's greatly the prison was preying on his health and that he was going back daily. That story wasn't told to Myrna. One day myself had business with the priest and I went into him. We were conversing in the parlour when he heard a person's footstep on the street outside. Never a knock on the house door or on the parlour door, but into the room where Myrna near Fianachta and a letter in her hands. It's with trouble she could talk. "A letter from the Queen, a letter from the Queen," she says. The priest took the letter, he opened it. I noticed that his hand was shaking and he opened it. There came the colour of death to his face after reading it. Myrna was standing out opposite him, her two eyes blazing in her hand, her mouth half open. "What does she say, father?" says she. "Is she sending him home to me?" "It's not from the Queen this letter came, Myrna," said the priest, speaking slowly, like as there would be some impediment on him, "but from the governor of the Gael in Dublin." "And what does it say? Is he sending him home to me?" The priest didn't speak for a minute. It seemed to me that he was saying to mind certain words, and the words, as you would say, going from him. "Myrna," says he at last, "he says that poor Colleen died yesterday." At the hearing of those words, Myrna burst a laughing. The like of such laughter I never heard. That laughter was ringing in my ears for a month after that. She made a couple of terrible screeches of laughter and then she fell in a faint on the floor. She was fetched home, and she was on her bed for half a year. She was out of her mind all that time. She came to herself at long last, and no person at all would think there was a thing the matter with her. Only the delusion that her son isn't returned home yet from the fair in Uachtarrád. She does be expecting him always, standing or sitting in the door half the day, and everything ready for his homecoming. She doesn't understand that there's any change in the world since that night. That's the reason, Colleen, says my father to me, that she didn't know the railway was coming as far as the burnt house. Times she remembers herself and she starts keening like you saw her. 'Twas herself that made yon keen you heard from her. May God comfort her, says my father, putting an end to a story. And Daddy, says I, did any letter come from the Queen after that? There didn't, nor the colour of one. Do you think, Daddy, was it Colleen that killed the Lord? I know it wasn't, said my father. If it was he, he'd acknowledge it. And I'm certain, as I'm living this night, that it's the black man killed the Lord. I don't say that poor Keeleen wasn't present. Was the black man ever caught, says my sister. He wasn't, Maisie, said my father. Little danger on him. Where did he belong, the black man, do you think, Daddy? Says I. I believe before God, says my father, that it's a peeler from Dublin Castle was in on it. Queenie and O'Neill saw a man very like him giving evidence against another boy in Tuam a year after that. Daddy, said Shawneen suddenly, when I'm a man, I'll kill that black man. God save us, says my mother. My father laid his hand on Shawneen's head. Maybe, little son, says he, we'll all be talking tally-ho out of the black soldiers before the clay will come on us. It's time for the rosary, says my mother. That's the end of the story. I know it was a bit of a long one. I haven't read that before, but I hope you enjoyed it. Just so you know, when we say the black man, it just means a man with black hair and black features. Um, it's a term used for those who were outsiders in Ireland at that time, because we're talking in the early 1900s, late 1800s there. But I hope you enjoyed it. Jeez, that went on a long time. And I hope you're fast asleep at this point, or at least a little bit more relaxed. That's it for me, from Paddy the Panda. And as I always say, Slán a bhaile.